right, now as we get started doing peaches, there's a couple of things that we are going to have on our stovetop. First, it's going to be our water bath canner. You're going to fill it so that the water goes about 1 inch over the heads of the jar, okay, when they're set down in there. So you may fill it up and find that you have to add more, maybe take some away, but you need 1 inch of water over the heads of the jars. Also, you're going to need a small pot. I've got this one to boil and sanitize your lids. So I've got a new box of lids here and I'm going to put them in. And in fact, I'm going to put 2 because I'm going to be canning that much. And then I just keep this, I bring it to a boil and then I kind of keep it on low to keep them nice and hot and sanitized. And then I'll stick that on the stove. So the next thing that's going to be on the burner is going to be your syrup. Now, according to my recipe book, it says for very thin syrup, which is what I prefer. I like to really savor the natural sweetness of the fruit, so I use thin syrup. And it just has less sugar. So for thin syrup, we're going to use 1 cup of sugar and 4 cups of water. And because I can as much as I do, I'm going to double that because I'll go through it pretty quickly. So I'm going to do 8 cups of water and 2 cups of sugar to double that. Exciting, I know.
Smoking.
Okay. And we are going to put this on the stovetop and bring it to a boil. And then once I have all of my fruit packed into my jars, I will pour this over and fill it up to the recommended headspace. And I'm going to heat this up until the sugar dissolves, and that will create my syrup. All right, when it comes to prepping the peaches themselves, peaches are kind of fun, but we don't want to can the fuzz on the peaches. So we're going to need to pit and peel them. Now, it is recommended that you put them in hot water for about 30 to 60 seconds and then put them in ice cold water. And what that does is it helps to release the skin from the peach so that it's easier to peel. Now, if your peaches are ripe enough, you may find that you don't need to do that step. It could go either way. So here I have a peach that's pretty ripe and these are huge peaches. I'm super excited about them. So I'm going to open up my peach and I'm going to pit them. Wash it out really good. You don't want any of the pit to be there. But I find that I can just sort of peel back the skin pretty well. Whatever I can't get off, I get with a knife, or I'll even quarter them. See how that's just kind of coming off in a big chunk? Okay, so the skins will come off pretty easily if your fruit is ripe enough. These ones I put in hot water and then dipped into cold, so we'll see how much easier those skins come off. And then you just kind of can pick what works best for you. Again, maybe not as ripe as the first, but you kind of see how that skin will start to peel off. What I find helps keep my patience intact is if I quarter them or cut them into 8s and I just use my knife to peel them back. And then I can get, whether they have disconnected fully or not, I'm still able to get the skins off. Now with peaches this big, I'm probably going to cut them into 8s because they are so large. But a small to medium sized peach, you can quarter them or cut them into 8s. Again, it's your preference. But I'm going to, once I cut them, I'm just going to drop them right into the jars. Now the jars do need to be sanitized, so you can put them through a cycle in your dishwasher. You can also put them on a cookie sheet face down in the oven and put a little bit of water on that cookie sheet and it'll help to steam and sanitize. You'll want to do that to bottles that are already clean and just kind of need to be warmed up. Me, I thought ahead and I put my bottles in the dishwasher this morning. I've got about 50 waiting for me. It's awesome. All right, so I'm just going to make sure that my fruit gets in there. Okay, and as I go, I'm going to kind of jiggle the fruit and make sure that it's fills in as many of the gaps as possible. I shouldn't have to add a whole lot of syrup. I want my bottles to be more peach than syrup. You know what I mean? If you put the peaches in hot water, you want to make sure not to boil them because they can get a bit too mushy on the outsides. And that just makes kind of for a messy product. You want them to be able to keep some of their form, and cooking them down too much might not help that. Since my Waterbath canner will hold 7 jars, I'm going to fill up 7 jars. And then I'm going to pour all of the syrup in at the same time and put them in the canner at the same time. Now, according to my cookbook, it tells me that I need to process, oh dear, I shut it. I believe it tells me that I need to process quarts 20 minutes and pints 15, but it might be less than that.
Yes.
Now, another thing I like to do to just help with the preservation process, and also it really helps it preserve the color, is I take some lemon juice. If you use true lemon at all, that works great. But I take some lemon juice, and once I've got my jar filled, I just pour a teeny tiny drop into the jar. And once I pour the syrup in, it all distributes evenly throughout the jar, and it helps keep that pretty peach color. That looks gorgeous when you can this stuff. All right. So I'm just gonna keep on going like this for a while. And we'll stop again when we are adding the syrup and the lids. All right, we've got our jars full of peaches. Now we're gonna go through, and I'm just gonna put a little drop of lemon juice in each to help preserve that color. Doesn't need a lot. If you don't have a very steady hand, I would recommend using a measuring spoon. Okay. Now I'm gonna use the funnel just to guide the syrup. All right, so as I fill this, I want to make sure that I've got a 1/2 inch headspace, and a 1/2 inch is just about the width of that rim. So I don't want the liquid to come above that spot. And like I said before, it doesn't take a whole lot of syrup, but you do want to make sure that it fills in all of those air pockets underneath the fruit. Okay, so for some, I may need to pour in a little bit of liquid, let it settle, and then come back. If you have a steady hand and can do this without the funnel, by all means. But the funnel definitely helps keep the mess contained. Now, I brought the lids over. I've had them boiling for a while, and we're going to use our little wand and the pot here. So I just lift one right up and set it on the jar. And that way I'm not adding any extra bacteria from my hands or anything. It's just taking it right out and placing it on top of the jar. All right, so I'm gonna take a rag and I'm just gonna wipe the rims to make sure that I didn't get any juice on the outside. I just make sure that when you are ready to open up these jars and enjoy the produce, that the ring isn't sticking, because that makes it extra difficult. So I'm just going to place a ring on every one to make sure that that lid is nice and secure. And I turned on the oven to start my Waterbath canner boiling a little bit earlier. So it takes usually about 10 to 15 minutes to bring that large pot to a full boil. At least that's how it is for me. So I started early to make sure that there was enough time. But I can hear it and it sounds like it may be ready. So once I have the lids on all of my jars, I'm gonna bring them over. I'm gonna remove the lid from the canner and I'm going to place them in. I'll place the center one in first just to kind of keep them balanced, but really it doesn't matter what order you place them in. Make sure that they're about evenly spaced and the rack is divvied up in a way that makes that easy to determine. Okay, so once I've got all of the peaches in, all of the jars are in and ready to go, then I just lift up the rack and I lower it in. Well, that's fun.
What does that mean?
That's ready to go. Okay, now I am not to a full boil yet, so I'm going to let that continue heating up, and then I will start the timer once it is boiling. It's really important that it's boiling for the full time that you're processing. You want to make sure that it processes enough to create that seal, and my handy dandy trusty book tells me to process pints for 25 minutes and quarts for 30 minutes. So we will check back in 30 minutes and show you how I wrap this whole thing up. All right, my timer has just gone off and I'm ready to pull my cans out. I'm going to turn the heat off and take the lid off. Now, it's not terribly hot, the lid, but of course you may want to use some hot pads, but I want to show you a little bit of a trick. As long as the water isn't like boiling over these handles, I used to take my hot pads and I would say, be cautious, use your hot pads to lift this up and out. But eventually my hot pads would get really wet and then the heat would just seep through them and burn my fingers anyway because of the hot water. But what I noticed is that this rack is actually made out of a metal that does not conduct heat very well. So usually, as long as the handles are sticking above the water, I can just really quickly reach in and lift it up and put it over the canner and I have no burns on my fingers. As long as you're working quick, then it's going to be fine. Now it's been processing for some time now. I'm going to use my grippers to lift them off the rack and I'm going to put them on a towel to dry and to seal. Now this is the fun part. Well, at least I think it's a fun part. As you take these out and as you let them cool, you're going to start to hear the buttons on the tops of the lids popping. They get sucked in and that is what shows, that is how you know that they've been sealed. So as these will cool, you'll start to hear these little pop and it's super fun. Some of them will pop right away. Others take, up to 24 hours. Before, some of them need a little bit of help, and if you push it down, if you push the button down and it stays, then you've got a seal. If you push it down and it pops back up, then it is not sealed. So you'll want to take measures to make sure that fruit doesn't go into storage because it won't preserve. So now I'm getting ready for my next batch and I'll need to warm up this water again and I'll just keep processing. Another thing that I do when these bottles are finished, I'll dry off the lids and with a wet erase marker, I'll write down the date that I canned these. I usually just do the month and the year, and that way in my food storage I know how long it's been sitting there. I've had my fruit last up to 2 years or so, and that's not because it goes bad at that point, it's because we just eat it that quickly. So once I have it marked and once it's cooled, I'll put it back in its boxes and back in my food storage. But that's basically it. That's how you water bath can. It's pretty simple, straightforward, super toasty. and it takes a lot of work and a lot of time on your feet, but I encourage you to try it. It's pretty fantastic and fun. And the produce, I'm not going to touch this because it's still hot. I mean, look at how beautiful that is. The color is just like, awesome. But you see all that space in the bottom where the fruit has floated to the top and all of the liquid is there in the bottom. And that's, I got that pretty darn packed. So that, for my family, is good for a meal on the side. Anyway, enjoy canning.